Ed here with the Digital Digest, and today I wanted to share a quick update on my experience with the Sony A9. Now, I've been getting a lot of feedback about overheating, or I should say really questions about whether or not the A9, like many mirrorless interchangeable lens cameras from Sony, if not almost all of them in the past, overheats. And I have addressed this in previous videos, my update and comparison to the A7R Mark II. And this video, again, is all about, does it overheat? Now, in the 4 sessions, lengthy sessions that I spent with this camera where I did exhaust the battery completely, one time I did experience overheating to the point that the camera did shut down. Now, 1 out of 4 isn't bad. Should it be nil? Of course. This shouldn't be happening, and I was hoping this would not be the case. But I do think this is definitely a case-by-case basis, as not every A9 user is reporting overheating. In fact, I really didn't experience it for the first time until today. Now, in terms of performance, every day that I've used this camera, things have gotten better and better as my knowledge of its inner workings and overall experience with it broadens. Now, that means more keepers, and really it just makes me feel like the A7R Mark II is kind of a slug, even though it's still an amazing camera, just because the A9 is in a different realm when it comes to that autofocus system. But again, with the overheating, I also want to point out that the conditions I'm shooting in are extreme. So I've seen some reports of people in the, I'm going to be speaking in Fahrenheit here because I am in the States, in the 80s. I'm in the closer to 100-degree mark in the South. Those of you that follow my channel know that I used to live in the New York area. I did relocate to the South, and down here, much higher humidity. And with the sun directly on this camera, when I did experience overheating, we were probably looking at about 110 degrees easily, exterior temperature. Once I moved into the shade, the overheating did go away, so that is something I want to point out. But of course, I was frustrated by that instance because otherwise, the camera has been absolutely stellar. So again, those of you out there wondering whether or not this is going to overheat on you in normal circumstances, situations, I have not experienced that. But in that 110-degree direct sun exposure, I did notice that it was quitting fairly quickly, not to the point that it was shutting down, but it did eventually shut down. I was able to recoup it, though. I essentially moved out of direct sunlight, which is not a convenience that we all have, especially if you're in a situation with it where there is no way to find shade. But I did do that, and that did rectify the problem with the A9. Within, I would say, a few minutes, I was back to shooting both stills and video without issue. For those of you waiting to see more of my stills, that'll come in the final review. But every day as I've used this camera, I get better and better shots, birds in flight mostly, in order to demonstrate the autofocus prowess of this camera. But everything else is great thus far, as I mentioned. It's not a perfect product. No camera is. But there is no question this is the best mirrorless interchangeable lens camera Sony has made to date. I have noticed that it hasn't sold out, but I'm sure part of that is that it's a $4,500 US product. And that inherently means that people are going to be more on the fence when fantastic cameras like the A7R Mark II that I previously compared it to are out there for considerably less dollars. But again, once you use both of these, it is kind of difficult to go back. And in my own head, I did rationalize it. I don't really need that speed. It's not necessary. And for, I would say, the majority of users, it isn't necessary. But once you experience it, it's kind of, how else can I put it, like being spoiled. And when you go back to the A7R Mark II, it performs very well, but you do inherently miss that autofocus system and that speed that just does not exist in the A7R Mark II's technology. All the other nuances, believe it or not, that Sony went for to make it pro really aren't the big draw for me personally. It is that autofocus system, because that is what I've been waiting to see out of Sony in a full frame body, and that's exactly what the A9 is all about. So while people may argue about the different upgrades and enhancements that Sony's brought to the table with the A9, there's nothing to argue about when it comes to its autofocus system. So again, The camera does overheat, but I'm in extreme temperature conditions, so that's a pretty good benchmark for those of you wondering whether or not it'll survive your shooting. Since, again, in direct sunlight, it was at least 110 because the actual temperature was 95. It could have even been closer to 115. And as I said, I rectified or remedied that simply by moving into the shade. This was on a tripod, by the way, not handheld, with the screen off body, and I was able to continue shooting. It wasn't a complete shutdown to the point that I couldn't recoup. Literally, I gave it about 30 seconds, powered it back on once I was in the shade, and I was back to shooting without even a warning. So go figure. Definitely a case-by-case basis. I would like to think that Sony's quality control would yield or dictate better results, but that is my update regarding overheating with the A9. Should it overheat? Absolutely not. I'm not a fanboy, in spite of what many Canicon posters have been trolling me for. Anyone who knows me knows that I am not paid to do any reviews. All of my reviews are based on products that I choose to review and that I think actually present practical value and use to all of you, my subscribers, viewers, anyone who's interested in watching my content. So again, the A9 seems to be amazing. Is it right for everyone? Absolutely not. But I think that if you're a Sony user, if you're invested in the lens system, it's definitely the best camera that they've made to date. And if you're, kind of fed up with what Canon and Nikon have, how they've been dragging their feet and not innovating, because no matter how much you could be in love with Canon or Nikon, the truth is the truth. They haven't been innovators for quite a while now. That's where Sony has made a mark in the business, and the numbers do not lie. That's why they have outperformed Canon and Nikon in sales now for several years. So this isn't about being a fanboy. This is about reality. This is not fake news. So that pretty much sums it up. The A9 does overheat infrequently in my experience, and that's in extreme temperatures and extreme humidity. Any questions or comments, please feel free to post them. Hit that like button, and as usual, please feel free to subscribe. Later.